To recap on the presentation, we're going to be going through the Chinuos charges. So we had a webinar in December, and this is a follow-on update for the updates from NESO and the forecasts for the expected changes. So just a quick recap of who we are. So NFU Energy, we are a part of the main NFU group. We cover a number of different services for farming and agriculture and horticulture, but as well as other industry sectors as well, covering energy management, energy contracts, looking at self-generation, any compliance or permits required, and just overall supporting with your energy strategy at whatever point in which you've started so far. So in terms of your energy bill, we're going to be breaking this down today. We've got an element for renewables, element for delivery, and then an element for commodity, which will be your electricity or gas. Previously, we used to see a split of 50-50 commodity and both taxations, renewable and delivery combined. However, now we're looking more at commodity moving into under the 40%. So it's turning more on taxations that are making up your energy bill. As you can see via the list under each area, there's quite a few taxations that are included. And today we're going to be looking at transmission, which is under the delivery banner. So what's been going on with Chinuos so far? Overall, we've got an aging infrastructure in the UK. This needs to be updated, cabling, all pylons, everything like that. So we need to find the money from somewhere. Unfortunately, that comes down to the end users and taxations that end up paying for that. We've got a push for net zero across the UK and to increase green electricity availability. We've also got balancing, so looking at the demand generation, the demand requirements and the generation, things like electrification are really taking a toll, especially on our energy and our electricity infrastructure, which we're seeing a few blackouts occurring, predominantly in the domestic area, to protect manufacturing and commercial requirements. And then the NESO forecast updates are just going to run through exactly what we're looking at going forward over the next 5-year period. Things that we're going to cover for supporting your business will be energy intensive industry reliefs, anything to do with on-site generation, so securing your supply and reducing your network reliance, energy tariffs, so what can you do? The only part of your energy pricing that you can really control is the commodity part, so make sure you've got the right contract. Voltage banding, because this is the main driver on the Chinuos costs, and then we've got our Chinuos calculator, which will give you clarity on forecasts. In terms of the calculator, this has been available for quite a few months now on the NFU website, and we encourage you to log on to the website, add in your details to give you a clearer forecast review of what the impact is likely to be. Within this, you can then start to see year-by-year breakdown of exactly what costs are going to look like for you going forward. Lee, that's also included within this presentation, will provide update on lobbying efforts for farming and agricultural customers and what we're doing to kind of help support. So any information that comes through the calculator will be driven into the lobbying efforts. Apologies, I haven't done a full overview of who's included today. So it'll be, we're going to move on to Ed now, who covers our Chinuos increases and what's been going on with NESO updates. We're then going to move on to Lee that will talk about lobbying efforts. And at the end, we're joined by a company called Horizon, who will run through any self-generation projects and support to remove reliance on the grid. So now I'm going to move over to Ed and let you cover, let you cover the other areas required.
Yeah, thanks, Carleen, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you to everybody who's joined us here today. If you joined us in our, I suppose, our sister webinar back in December, I gave a bit of a new overview of The path that's led us here today, Carleen covered off quite a bit of that in the introduction, which is great. But the other points that I think just are worth highlighting for context is that the transmission network use of service charge, or TNUoS, as it'll be affectionately known throughout this webinar, it was born out of another acronym, which was TCR, which was the Targeted Charging Review, which was essentially the government looking at how it raises funds to maintain its aging transmission network. I read a report recently that there was infrastructure still in place that was implemented in the 1950s, for example, but also to expand it, to be able to bring online and deliver a lot of the clean energy programs that you will be hearing about regularly in the news, but also for projects that you want to implement yourself as part of your businesses. The previous mechanism was called triads, and this was very much a time-bound exercise where charges were apportioned out depending on the time of day. This was seen to have essentially failed. Businesses had got quite good at importing at times around triads to avoid and mitigate the weight of those costs. And skip forward a few months, and we ended up with TNUoS. So what is the damage? Because this is a very challenging period that we're going to enter with standing charges. The initial view was that we were going to see a 95% increase on average. This was published in September 2025. However, the final rates published at the end of January were actually that we're going to see an average increase of 62 across the board. This is very much an average. Some bands are going to be more heavily affected than others, some less so. I provide a couple of examples there. High voltage 2, that's going up 87%, so 25% above average. And those who are in extra high voltage 1 is, I think, the worst hit band, and that's going to go up 102% on what they're paying now. In there, I mentioned a client of NFU Energies who is an extra high voltage customer. They are going to be rebanded up into EHV3, which means that they've got an increase on their TNUoS costs of around £650,000 a year, which is, it's a lot. I mentioned there about rebanding. This is also something that is changing. The level of KVA that determines whether you are in LV1 or LV2, for example, that is being modified. It is absolutely worth familiarizing yourselves with that, and we can share what those bands are after the call. It's very much I suppose a recommended action to take, to have a look at what your contract says in regards to this, and what standing charges are going to be passed through to you. Fixed contracts and flexible contracts are very different. And in terms of fixed contracts, you will have signed up more than likely to a contract that fixes, as it says on the tin, the non-commodity elements of your bill. However, in the wake of the energy crisis, some suppliers putting clauses in those contracts that allow some reopening to pass through huge industry changes through to you, and this very much classes as one of those. Please do look at the contract. Please do speak to NFU Energy if you've got any concerns with that contract, so we can advise you on what's going to be coming up for your business in April. The energy intensive industries list has been published for some time, and I highlight this as a mitigation strategy again for some, and there is work that NFU and NFU Energy are doing to try and help members on this front. I won't tread on Lee's toes too much because he is going to talk about this later, but to provide a little bit of background, through the British Industrial Supercharger, the Network Charging Compensation Scheme was announced, and this is a 90% relief on standing charges for those that qualify as energy intensive industries. For example, this does affect members. Dairy is on the list, many food production sick codes, which it boils down to whether you're eligible or not, are on there. But there are also things like controlled environment horticulture, which is not on the list. And Lee will touch on work that the NFU and NFU Energy are doing to write that a little bit later in the presentation. And this is a relatively straightforward scheme to interact with. You know, if you're eligible, i.e. you have the correct SIC code, your energy costs are over 20% of your gross value add, you can sign up to this and you can really receive relief on your energy bills. It is a quarterly submission, which is relatively straightforward to do using the energy that you've been billed for. And subsequently, there's a reconciliation exercise where relief will be applied to your bills. Another thing I wanted to mention at the bottom there is about non-final demand. I'm going to use an AD plant as a case in point for this, as they're a very good example. Every house up and down the country at the moment, and businesses that just purely import energy are final demand customers, i.e. that is where the electricity stops. Non-final was raised in recognition of those import electricity supplies that purely exist to provide backup that directly supports generation. So again, using an AD plant as an example, the majority of businesses I interact with use their engines, their biogas engines, to run sites. Should those be down for maintenance, they would import electricity purely to support the plant. And that is what non-final demand is. This will give you relief on your TNUoS charges, amongst some other items on the bill. And if you are eligible, is absolutely worth looking into. And again, I'm more than happy to discuss with you about your business and whether you're eligible. So just moving on to the next one. This is something that's coming in the future. The Network Charging Compensation Scheme is live now, but the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme, or BICS, as I'll refer to it for succinctness, is something that's going to be coming in April next year. And this is very much a network charging compensation scheme light. The charges that you will get relief on from your standing charge perspective are similar to those that if you have been interacting with a peer-to-peer contract recently, or the small supply exemption, your relief is coming off the same elements. And these are things like your renewable obligation, your feed-in tariff and capacity market obligation, which are a saving of approximately £40 a megawatt hour or 4 pence a kilowatt hour off your bill. Now, again, Lee will probably touch on this because there is work ongoing between NFU and NFU Energy to try and get our community recognised in here. As at the minute, the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme is just for frontier industries. And I list some of those here, which manufacturing, clean energy, etc., will be eligible, but the wider farming community will not. So just moving on again to the next slide, if we can. I think it's important to just spell out what's next, because TNUoS is very much here to stay, and it is important for all businesses to keep abreast of what changes are coming down the pipeline. At the end of April, we will get our initial forecast of what 2027 and 2028 is going to look like. The recent publication of the charges did not change what the 5-year view was going to look like. That was very much frozen. At the end of September, this year, we will have a better understanding of what that 5-year view looks like. Current projections are showing a between 5 and 10% increase through the next 5 years. And if it is going to be any different than that, if it is going to be any more than that, we need to be preparing our businesses for these increases to come. And then in a very similar timeline to we saw in 2025 and early 2026, we are going to see the first draft by the end of November, with the final rates being published at the 31st of January 2027. That's more or less it for me. However, I don't have a slide for the next thing I did want to discuss, as it was a relatively new interaction that NFU and NFU Energy had with NESO. Some members of the NFU and I were down in Westminster on Tuesday to discuss some of the work that they are doing that is relating to their strategic connections plan. This very much impacts the farming and growing community, as one of the things on the topic, for example, was land use framework and the issue of using agricultural land for large-scale solar projects. We talked to NESO about the importance that the work that they're doing has in informing government is, and looking at certain types of modelling that they're doing to, for example, look at what it would look like if we put large-scale solar on industrial and commercial properties. You look at the new distribution centres that are popping up for some of the large businesses around the country, using those as an example rather than using the footprint on agricultural land was an example that we put to them that would be good. The other was a change that's actually in the pipeline but has been put on hold for some time, and that's the mixed use category. Now, we talked about non-final demand and final demand earlier in this presentation. Mixed is very much a recognition that businesses and their intersection with energy is complicated. Will interact with solar PV on a barn roof, for example, that generates electricity that's exported to the grid, as well as having times that they consume. They are therefore both a final and non-final demand customer, and therefore there should be recognition of this and relief applied to standing charges. And very much in the farming and growing community, that's applicable, as I say, from your PV at scale on barn roof all the way through to controlled environment horticulture, who by and large use CHPs to support their crop and export a large amount of electricity onto the grid. And that was something that we're hoping we can engage with NESO in a little bit further down the road, and was a very positive conversation. That's it from me. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to taking some questions in the immediacy after this webinar, but also if you have anything further down the line that you think of, please feel free to ask.
Can't get myself off mute there. Thank you very much, Ed. That was very informative. Giving you a bit more information about what's going on in the wider picture, and also just a bit more detail on areas that can support you going forward. Leading on nicely to Lee, so I'll hand over to you if you can go over what's been going on with your lobbying efforts so far.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. If you joined the first webinar pre-Christmas, you'll have heard me talk about the different mitigations we're trying to secure for our members. Ed's just touched upon them over the last few minutes, but I'm going to just expand on it slightly and explain what the barriers currently are to accessing them, and then where our conversations with government have got to. So the first one was the Network Charging Compensation Scheme, which, as a reminder, applies to businesses which fall under an eligible standard industry classification code, a SIC code, and where electricity costs are over 20% of their gross value added. Now, accessing this scheme clearly could help our members with the largest energy profiles, such as glass houses, but they're currently not recognised as an energy intensive industry because the SIC code classification fails to recognise subsectors of agriculture and horticulture, and I'll explain what that means a bit more in a moment. We've got a similar situation with the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme. Ed mentioned that that's not actually due to come into effect until 2027, albeit we are pushing for that to be expedited. But even then, there are two barriers. The first, as Ed mentioned, is that it's targeted at the frontier industries within the industrial strategy, and they currently don't include food or farming sectors. The second barrier is, again, needing to be within an eligible SIC code. And these haven't yet been determined for this particular scheme, but we know farming sits outside of the industrial strategy and therefore is not listed as a frontier industry. But history tells us that we are also likely to fall outside of the eligible SIC codes unless or until they are updated. Now, as a reminder, the government has schemes in place, or new ones to come, in recognition of the relatively high costs of energy provision in the UK, and they don't want that to be a barrier to competitiveness. Now, obviously, we know that these charges that are forthcoming are going to be a significant barrier to competitiveness for our industry. But the issue for farming is simply the criteria for eligibility. It's not a matter of asking for something new or different for farming. They already have the mechanisms in place, but we simply need a more accurate recognition of our energy intensity and use, which would mean better access to what already exists. And the third mitigation, which sits alongside these, is the targeted charging review, which Ed briefly mentioned. This has got implications for how the bands are defined and where businesses fall within those bands. And as an example of how farming businesses are impacted by this, standing charges are based on the peak demand of a business, whereas farming businesses are very often seasonal in nature, and their peak electricity use does not sufficiently reflect the seasonality of energy requirements. Now, this is something that certainly impacts members across a range of different sectors, whereas something like the network charging compensation scheme is only going to be supportive of those highest energy users. So what have we've been doing to try and mitigate or secure these mitigations? As I say, a critical component, absolutely critical, is to ensure the standard industry classification codes, the SIC codes, more fairly and accurately represent the farming sector. Should we get a change and therefore able to access the existing schemes, it would also put us in a good position for anything that comes in the future. Now, for agriculture, SIC codes are grouped by their product, not by the production system. And this means we have high energy intensive products grouped under the same SIC code as lower energy intensive products. And therefore that brings the average down and we fall outside the definition of an energy intensive industry. Now, UK SIC codes are a mirror of international SIC codes. However, the government did give itself the ability to add an extra digit to each code so that they can be broken down to an additional layer. But to date, this has still not been done for any SIC code. However, thanks to the data collected through that NFU Energy calculator, we have been able to make a compelling case to update these codes. We've been able to show, for example, that there are differing levels of impacts by subsector of farming. And we've also used data from the climate change agreements to compare the energy intensity of some subsectors of farming with other industries which do have eligible SIC codes. And it shows very clearly that certain sectors of farming would be eligible for schemes should that SIC code be broken down. The evidence we got through the NFU Energy calculator is really compelling. We fed it directly into DEFRA and shared it with DBT. Some of the headlines show that on average, similar to the figures that Ed showed earlier, businesses are going to be facing somewhere between 40 and 90% increase in charges this April. Now, we know some individual businesses are facing even higher increases than this. And if you look at the impact over the next 5 years, the average increase compared to today across all the sectors is a staggering 246%. But some sectors of farming will actually see increases of 300% plus. Now, in monetary terms, we have evidence of tens of millions of pounds of increased costs over the next 5 years. But this is still from a relatively small sample of businesses, so we know the actual figures will be much higher than that. We've used this evidence in a number of ways, but including in our response to the consultation on the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme, which closed a few weeks ago now. And it supported our arguments for farming to be better recognised within the industrial strategy. That links back to frontier industries and that links back to eligibility for things like the BICS scheme. Later this year, we know that DBT is planning to review the eligibility criteria for the British Industry Supercharger, which Ed also mentioned has an impact on things like the network charging compensation scheme. But we know, well, there's no date for that yet. So we know this is going to be too late for our members who will see the cost increases this April. And this review, which will also require parliamentary time to approve any changes at the end, will be far too late. Now, in recent weeks, the NFU, we've had representatives have meetings with the DBT minister, separately with the farming minister, which we believe was also building a case to speak directly to the DBT minister herself. We've also had regular dialogue with DEFRA, We've helped introduce them to some of our members who can speak to them directly and help bring to life, bring some case studies forward, which help back up the more industry-wide data we've been sharing. Last time I spoke, I also mentioned we'd written to the chair of Ofgem to call on them to expedite a decision on something called a proposal of a high capacity, low utilisation scheme, which basically would better recognise seasonal energy users and therefore could lower standing charges accordingly. And we are pushing for an urgent response as we speak. So to conclude, we're raising this at every opportunity by our most senior officials into the senior officials within DEFRA and DPT. We've left them in no doubt of the urgency of a decision to be made to open these access for farming sectors and prevent that cliff edge moment this April. I do appreciate, as we talk here at the beginning of February, how close that is. So this is absolutely the top of our list. Evidence is critical. It always has been. And while we already do have some compelling data, thanks to everyone that's filled in the calculator so far, it certainly never harms to collect more. So any businesses that haven't yet completed the energy calculator, it helps you see what the impact will be for your own business, but we can collate the sort of anonymized data at the back end of that and build our case even further. It might not change the percentages I referenced earlier. If we've already got a relatively reflective sample, then those percentages may be the same, but certainly the monetary terms, we may see, that those tens of millions increases significantly. So the more data we have, the better. We are working very hard on this, and as things progress, we will share updates through our usual channels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee. That was really informative and great to hear all of the good work that NFU are doing in order to support our farming, agriculture and horticultural members. In terms of the calculator, we will be providing a link in the follow-up to this webinar to all that have registered. So again, have a look on the website, have a look at your forecast, but equally ensuring the data is there so that we can continue the hard work that NFU are doing in that sense. So we are going to pick up question and answer at the end. So please feel free to either use the chat function at the top, or there is a Q&A section along the top as well. We'll pick that up. So now we're going to move over to Tom Griffin, who joins us from Horizon. Tom's going to run through a little bit more about self-generation projects and how you can secure your supply to site by generating your own electricity and reducing reliance on grid requirements. So Tom, over to you as I change the slide.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us here today to discuss benefits of energy self-generation. So on the next slide, we're going to talk through, first of all, the different technologies that Horizon offers, and then we're going to talk about how the membership can potentially benefit from these. So in terms of areas of either energy reduction or energy self-generation, the technologies that we can provide include solar PV, battery storage, wind turbines, hydrogen-ready combined heat and power, heat pumps, and various other technologies that can help you become more energy efficient, or can help you generate energy on site and avoid those grid charges. And if we go on to the next slide, we're very proud to have been appointed as a partner to the National Farmers Union Energy. The advert that is shown on the right-hand side of this page was featured in the December issue of the British Farmers and Growers magazine, and it's also going to feature in the March editions of the upcoming Farming Wales and NFU Poultry. Within this, we set out that there are various options that we can support members, and so today we're going to focus specifically on wind energy as a technology. We're going to talk through what examples of developing a wind energy project either on your site or near your site could look like, what a capital investment option would look like in terms of return on investment, and also zero capital options usually through a power purchase agreement, and what the characteristics of those would look like as a case study. On the next slide, As we talk through, primarily we're looking at on-site opportunities. So we're assessing your site to see if you have suitability to develop a project. Can you generate energy on your site? Can you benefit from that directly without having to export it to the grid? And sometimes if you haven't got opportunities on your site, but you have nearby land that would be suitable, we can help arrange the legal requirements that are necessary to take a partnership over that land. So we can talk to you about the specifics around how that would support, but we would then take the power directly that is generated on near land directly to behind the meter connections at your site so that you can benefit again from what becomes self-generation. Now, if we go on to the next slide, the reason that you would want to look at self-generating has been touched on already within the discussion today. But primarily, we're looking at saving all of the costs that you have from buying energy from the grid. So there are huge amounts of costs that we see that are not just related to the wholesale cost, but all the other charges that are associated. If you're generating on site, you can avoid all of those charges. And so therefore, your cost of self-generating can be significantly lower than the cost that you could buy from the grid. Now, in terms of on the next slide, we focus on self-generation. This is specifically around wind energy, and we're going to give you some case studies today around what this looks like. Of the three key areas that we can focus on, the first is around feed-in tariff repowering. So there is an opportunity at the moment where there are existing wind turbines that may be on your land where you are benefiting from feed-in tariff at the moment. Some of those projects have not been serviced correctly. We've got old turbines that can be inefficient. So there is an opportunity to assess those to see whether or not we can acquire those for you, whether we can repower them by putting a new turbine on, and helping you benefit from longer term revenue streams, including discussing what those options could look like. In addition to that, there's also the on-site development, which is the traditional developing a project on your site. And we try and focus on making sure that we size those projects correctly so that you use about 70% or more of the energy that is being generated. Now, for a wind energy project, the minimum threshold that is required would be around 250,000 kilowatts annually of your consumption, and in which case we can then help you to generate on site and use the majority of the power that's being generated. And then for near site opportunities or potential export development projects, these are larger. These are typically 0.5 megawatt up to 20 megawatt projects, which are the size that we focus on at Horizon Power Group. And we will look at projects where we are within 5 kilometers of your site or 5 kilometers of a distribution point or an export point. Now, to qualify, you've got to be outside of a national park, outside of a national landscape, what used to be an area of outstanding natural beauty, and also not within the curtailment of an airport. So if you wish to discuss those kind of projects, reach out to the NFU Energy, and we will help assess whether or not your site could be suitable. Now, on the next slide, we're going to give you some specific examples. So if you're developing a project as capital investment, there's two examples here. The first is a 100 kilowatt wind turbine. So a 100 kilowatt wind turbine is going to cost around £400,000 to build. It will generate around 285,000 kilowatt hours annually, although that is very project specific. And so we will go through and work with you to understand what the specific wind yield would be on your site for your location. The turbine's project for 100 kilowatt, the lifespan will be between 20 to 25 years. And we only work with tier one manufacturers. So we work with the global leader to roll these projects out. Now, you also have to be a setback distance of around about 300 meters from nearby residential properties, although your own property can be excluded. Now, that payback is around 6 years. So the paybacks are quite strong. And to give you an example, if you're generating solar on your site, the cost of generating solar could be around 4.5 to 5 pence per kilowatt hour. The cost of generating your own wind energy from a 100 kilowatt turbine is going to be somewhere around 7 pence. Now, On a larger scale turbine, where we're looking at a 1 megawatt turbine, the cost of developing this is going to be somewhere between 2.1 to 2.6 depending on million, depending on what the final dimensions of that project are and some of the additional costs that are associated with the turbine of that size. These will generate typically between 1,800 megawatt hours and 2,600 megawatt hours annually. And again, we go through a very detailed assessment of your site to look at what the specific wind yield would be for your location. Now, as an example, a 1 megawatt turbine is roughly around 100 meters as a typical turbine height. That's to the very tip, and you would have a lifespan of that project for around 25 years. Again, we only work with the UK and the global market leader. And you require a 500-meter setback distance from nearby residential, although again, your own property can be excluded. Now, the payback for that, we are looking at around about 5 years. Now, at the moment, there are some tax benefits and tax incentives for developing a project of this type. So solar projects benefit from a 50% special rate first year capital allowance, which means that the entire project, 50% of that value can be written off against your corporation tax. And wind projects, depending on the wind project, can either qualify for a 100% main rate first year capital allowance or for a 50% special rate. Now, it is project dependent. We can discuss those details with you as to how you could benefit. For wind projects, there are certain exclusions. So the cost of obtaining planning, the cost of the civil works are excluded from that. Now, not everybody wants to use their own money. Some people want to preserve their capital for their own investments elsewhere. So in this instance, we provide what can often be considered an off-balance sheet finance project. So it's zero capital investment from you. And it doesn't impact your gearing typically in the way that these are structured, although again, that can be project by project dependent. If we were developing a wind project for you and we were paying for it, we take a lease over the footprint of where that land is that gives us the right to build that turbine and then to maintain it over its lifetime. The benefit to you is that you don't have any maintenance costs, you don't have any capital investment up front, but you enter into an agreement with us to buy the power over the long term of that project. So typically the power purchase agreement will be around 25 years. There is flexibility as to whether that rate can be fixed during that time, whether it can be semi-fixed or whether it inflates throughout. And there's different mechanisms, again, that we can explore with you to help you understand what is most appropriate for your site. But the benefit here is that this can be at a significant discount to what you're paying at the moment. So a solar project can typically be around 10 pence. As a PPA rate, and a wind project, depending on the nature of the project and the specific cost of your site, can range from around 14 to 15 pence. There are also blended rates that are available. So we work in partnership with Sabre Renewables, who provide some of the funding here. And so if you have a project where you're looking at wind, you're looking at solar PV, and you're looking at combined heat and power, we can actually provide that as one single rate for you and provide all of those technologies. We can also look at co-developing the sharing the risk with you in terms of the development risk. So depending on the project specifics, we can look at potentially taking that planning risk and sharing those costs with you. So thank you very much for inviting us today. There are some further, on the next slide, there's some further information around the benefits and the complexities around a power purchase agreement. We're not going to discuss these today due to timing differences, but this will be supplied in the pack that is sent through. Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button again. Thank you very much, Tom. That was really helpful, just to give us a bit more overview of other areas that you can investigate, putting either wind in specific in that example or solar onto your land to help either generate and export into the grid or just reduce your reliance on the grid on site, or equally share of both. So in terms of a nutshell recap would be fill out the calculator, understand a bit more about the forecast. This has been updated. So NESO are the national energy operator, and they are the ones that provide the forecasts and overview of what to expect going forward. So all of that has been updated on our website. understand what's really fixed in your energy contract. So as I said before, the only part that you can really make a difference on now is the commodity on your energy tariff side, and then looking at how you're consuming it and then how you're generating it. So we can help by reviewing your bills initially. Let's look at your current contract setup and what you're paying for it. Then look at exploring renewable options, generating on site, or equally looking at energy efficiencies to reduce your end pound that you're spending. As we said, we will send over the copy of the slides and also a link to the website with a calculator after this webinar is completed. But now we're going to move over to some question and answer sessions and see if we've got any information that's come through so far. So let me just have a browse and see if we've got anything coming in. Okay, so in terms of battery side of things, that is something that we can pick up within a feasibility study. So although we use partners for delivery, NFU Energy, we offer feasibility studies to go through all different options for site and what's best. The battery can stack up in some areas, but it is site dependent. Usage and shift patterns, usage, shape, that kind of thing. So we would look at that on a case-by-case basis. Ed, I'll pass over to you if you can pick up the question about the triad charges.
Yeah, do you have that to hand, Carleen? Sorry, I wasn't scrolling through the chat. From Daniel. Sorry, yeah, I've got that now. Apologies. Can we confirm that triad charges do still exist for sites meters in the Midlands, east of England, and in the south? Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, that's a really good point that you make there, Daniel. Triads still do exist, but at a much more diluted rate than they were pre April 2023. That's a very good point that you make, and yeah, thank you for highlighting that.
Okay, so questions are a bit light today, which hopefully means we've covered quite a lot in the presentation. If there are any more questions, then please add them into the chat, and we'll hold on for another 5 minutes to pick any up.
Hi, Hannah. Thanks for your query about the details of the published charges. I think that the best thing to do for that would be to circulate the table, which shows what the appropriate charges are per band, and that way you can identify where you fall within that. Again, also I think Carleen and Lee have both highlighted the calculator. If the forward forecast as we currently understand it will also show what that impact to your business would be. Based on that, you would need your MPAN and your capacity, which should be found on your energy bills to be able to complete that. But that also should not only show you what the direct impact in terms of pounds and pence are from April 26. April the 1st, 26, I should say, but also as we currently understand the 5-year plan. But absolutely, we'll make sure that we share the table of charges in the pack afterwards. I think I'll pick up that question from Andrew as well, if that's okay with everybody. Thank you so much for that query. It's an absolutely brilliant and valid example of a thing that Lee was mentioning in his section, which was about one of the lobbying efforts that the NFU and NFU Energy have been heavily involved in, is this idea of high capacity but low utilization. As far as I understand what the changes look like for that, it is the proposals to Ofgem where either you pay the peak for your capacity just for the months that you are using it. And I suppose the other proposal for that was that you have an average based on your use over the course of the year. My own opinion on that, probably if I'm sat in Nesso's shoes and this gets passed, I'm probably thinking the latter rather than the former, as for parity. But absolutely, that idea of the peak only being used for a smaller proportion of the year is important. There is also the rebanding that is taking place in April, don't forget, which has wider implications on if you have done some capacity reduction previously, which on a case-by-case basis, I'm more than happy to have a chat with you about if you wanted to reach out.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, more information will be provided directly for specific questions. I think overall KVA is can be quite a complicated one. Once you've given it up, it can be difficult to get it back. So it's definitely one to consider in terms of business future. If you have any growth plans, anything like that, to make sure that you're not giving something up that you may need at a later date. Remember, while the grid turns to more electrification, that does put more of a reliance on the demand requirements. So looking at self-generation could be the key to help support with that. Overall, as I said earlier, look at your energy contracts, make sure you're getting the right price for them. Look at energy optimization, ensure you're not wasting anything on site because it is costing you. All of the taxations are calculated on kilowatt hours used. Also looking at self-generation. If you have the ability to, you can remove the reliance of the grid, which also then reduces any taxation requirements, and you can then have more of a security of supply on site. As I say, at NFU, we do cover a wide range of services and support for energy, whether that be contracts, renewables, feasibility reviews, energy optimization, or any permits for any boilers, anything like that you have. Please do get in touch. We are more than happy to help anyone and everyone. And thank you very much for attending today. We will send everything out afterwards. Thank you again. Bye-bye.